We would like to talk about the opposite or the negation of a statement. A statement or a proposition is a statement or a sentence that is either true or false. You may know that it's true or false, or you may not know. For example, we know that Mars is a planet is true. We know that dogs can fly is false. We know that John Smith will be our 80th president. No, we don't have any idea whether that is true or false. Seems unlikely, but we don't really know. But it is either true or false. So if you have a true statement, its opposite is false. If you have a false statement, its opposite is true. I think that makes sense. Let's look at some examples of writing the opposite or the negation of a sentence. So, for example, saying Mars is a planet is true. The opposite would be Mars is not a planet, which of course would be false. Suppose I could put that in red. That's the answer. Okay. Dogs can fly. That is false. So dogs cannot fly would be a true statement. And that would be the opposite or the negation of this sentence. All right. You can pause and try yourself and then start the video back up and see if you've got the same answer. Carrots are not meat. Carrots are not meat. Is that true? Yeah. So what would the opposite be? Carrots are meat. Of course, that would be false. The original one was true, and the opposite is false. Okay, if I say 2 plus 3 is not equal to 5, the negation or the opposite would be 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. The original one was false, and this one is true. Now, we have to be careful with a statement like this. I am happy. Right now, I'm the one reading this. That may be true. But the opposite of I am happy is not I am unhappy. They are not opposites. You could actually be happy and unhappy at the same time. What if your firstborn child was born the day your mom died? You would be happy and unhappy at the same time. Now, that's pretty extreme. More likely is that you're neither. You're not really happy, or you're not unhappy. So I'm sitting here working, doing math. Teaching math is my job. So while I like it, I'm not really happy, but I'm not unhappy either. So I'm neither. So the opposite of I am happy is I am not happy. Don't mistake the opposite of happy to be unhappy. There are other ones like that, like cold. I am cold. The opposite of I am cold is not I am hot, because maybe you're perfectly comfortable. You're not hot, nor are you cold. So be careful with those. Some things might be actually opposites. They might not. 5 is an even number. The opposite would be 5 is an odd number, because those are the two states. They are opposites. But you do not always have words that are opposites, so be careful with that. Okay, what if you have an and, an or statement? So if you have an and statement, its opposite is going to be an or statement. And the vice versa is true. If you have an or statement, its opposite is an and statement. So suppose I say apples are red and oranges are green. You know that's a false statement because I said and for it to be true, both pieces need to be true. So for it to be false, I only need to have one part of it wrong. Oranges are green is the part, so that's what makes this false. Apples are red and oranges are green. So the opposite would be apples are not red. Here's the case where you got to be careful. Or oranges are not green. Now, is that true or false? Apples are not, whoops, I left out the word red, or oranges are not green. Apples are not red is false. So oranges are not green is true. So that's a true statement, and the original one was a false. Apples are red and oranges are green. Well, apples can also be green, so even that doesn't matter because the fact that oranges are not green made the first one false, and the fact that oranges are not green made the second one true. So it doesn't even really matter whether we're talking about red or green apples. So the opposite of the and is an or. Okay, let's look at this one. Dogs bark or birds sing. So dogs do not bark and, let's put an and in cats, or birds do not sing. So if I say one of those is true, one or both because we use inclusive or, dogs bark or birds sing or both, that's true. So if I said dogs do not bark or birds do not sing, that would still be true. In order to make an or the opposite, I have to use an and. So dogs bark or birds sing. No, neither of those is true. Dogs don't bark and birds don't sing. Right? Fish eat worms and people do not eat worms. So what's the opposite of fish eat worms? Fish do not eat worms. And the and is going to change to an or. People do eat worms. So is the first one true? Fish eat worms and people do not eat worms. There may be some exception, but in general, people do not eat worms, so that's true. So the opposite would be fish do not eat worms or people do eat worms. Okay, let's try the opposite of this one. It does not snow or school is canceled. So it does snow and school is not canceled. So the opposite of the or is the and. Again, you try it, pause the video, try it, and then see if you get the same answer as I do for these next two. Bugs are not creepy and snakes are not scary. So the opposite of bugs are not creepy is bugs are creepy. And has to change to an or. The opposite of snakes are not scary is snakes are scary. The opposite of that and is an or sentence. I am not hot or I am not cold. So the opposite would be I am hot and I am cold. Can I be hot and cold at the same time? Let me tell you, as an old lady, yes, you can. All right, let's look at the next thing. Let's say if we have an if-then statement. So an if-then statement is going to turn into the first part being true and the then part being false, and you're going to put the word and in there. You can put the word but in there. But is the same word as and, but with a little bit of surprise. We sometimes call this if then the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the if part is the hypothesis, the then part is the conclusion. When we look at arguments, we will use the word conclusion in both ways, in the if-then statement and in an argument. That's coming soon. So let's look and see, if I study, then I pass the quiz. So if I study is the hypothesis, and I pass the quiz is the conclusion. So if I study, then I pass the quiz. Suppose that's definitely a true statement. We know that's not always true, but for a second, let's pretend that it is true. If I study, then I pass the quiz. What would make it false? What would make you come back and say to me, you lied, I studied, but what? But I don't pass the quiz. So notice I could put I study, but because I'm surprised, I thought I would. So you can put either sentence, I study, but I don't pass the quiz, or I study and I don't pass the quiz. That would be the opposite. I say I study, then I pass the quiz. If that's a lie, then I study, but I don't pass is the truth. If I study, then I pass is a lie, then I study, but I don't pass is the truth. Okay, so the opposite of an if-then or a hypothesis then a conclusion is the hypothesis and not the conclusion. The hypothesis and not the conclusion. Let me write that up here. If hypothesis, then conclusion. Go ahead and put it down here. The opposite is hypothesis, but not conclusion. Or I could say hypothesis and not conclusion. Okay, let's try this one. If I do not eat, then I will be hungry. So the opposite or the negation would be I do not eat. That stays exactly the same. And I will not be hungry. So I'm saying the opposite there. The first part, the hypothesis, stays the same. I do not eat, but I will not be hungry. You would expect that if I don't eat, I'm going to be hungry. That's why you might use but, because you're surprised that even though you didn't eat, you aren't hungry. If I sleep late, then I miss class. So I sleep late, but I do not miss class. Again, the hypothesis stays the same. I sleep late, and I do not miss class. You might use the word but because you are a little surprised that even though you overslept, you didn't miss class. If I cheat, then I do not learn. So the opposite or the negation would be I cheat and I learn. Or I cheat, but I learn. So the hypothesis stays the same and the conclusion changes. Okay, let's try this one. If Congress does not vote, then the bill does not pass. So Congress does not vote, but the bill does pass. Of course, you can use the word and. Congress does not vote, and the bill does pass. So again, the hypothesis stays the same, and the conclusion is the opposite, literally and. Okay, let's step this up a bit. Let's put the hypothesis to be an or statement. So the hypothesis is the or statement. It rains or snows. So we're going to keep that. It rains or snows. And we need that comma there. It's required to separate it from the next part, which is an and. The picnic is not canceled. Again, we could put but there. It rains or snows, but picnic is not canceled. Again, because you might be surprised that the picnic is not canceled with it raining or snowing out there. Okay, so the hypothesis stays the same. The conclusion changes to its opposite. All right, so let's try this one. It does not rain, so the hypothesis is just that single statement. But look at the conclusion. The conclusion is an and. It's the conclusion that gets the opposite. So when we do the opposite of this part, that and will have to change to an or. So it does not rain has to stay the same. That's the hypothesis. And or but, the game is not played or our team does not win. Again, you can have that same sentence with and here and here. That but can't change. This but. This and can be and or but. That or has to stay an or. So it does rain, and or but, the game is not played, or our team does not win. So you have to look at that. Okay, let's look at this last example. We do not practice and do not care. So look, there is a compound sentence in the hypothesis. Then we do not win and we look silly. So the negation or the opposite would be we do not practice and do not care. We need the comma there. And or but, we do win or we do not look silly. Okay, so again, the hypothesis stays the same. We do not practice and do not care, but we do win or we do not look silly. And remember, these are inclusive ors, so it's possible we win and we don't look silly. So remember, or is this one or that one or both. So that's our negation. And we will use these to look at different kinds of statements and eventually look at using them in arguments.